In an offseason full of all sorts of drama, a handful of superstar players moved to new teams and changed the landscape of Major League Baseball. Today, I'll be going over the hitters who signed the most lucrative deals and the directions their teams have gone in this 2022 season. Welcome to Pastime. We'll begin with some housekeeping. First and foremost, we're only about a third of the way into the season, and on top of that, most of the players that we're looking at today have more than 5 years left on their contracts. So what we've seen so far is just a fraction of what they'll do in their uniform. So this video is less to judge what they've done and more to see what we should pay attention to moving forward. So with that being said, let's break down how the big names of the offseason are doing so far. We'll start with the two shocking moves that really kick things off: Marcus Semien and Corey Seager being signed by the Texas Rangers. Last season, Marcus Semien signed a one-year deal with the Toronto Blue Jays to prove himself at second base, and it went about as well as it possibly could. He finished third place in MVP voting and scored himself a huge contract with the Rangers at 31 years of age. Let's dive into his performance with the Blue Jays last season. I'll be showing stats with scatter plots, which show every offensive player in MLB. The further to the right the player is, the more that they've played, and the higher up they are, the better they've performed in that category. I'll also be showing their numbers in the top left corner compared to the MLB average. We'll start with batting average, to show the ability to hit for contact. In 2021, Marcus Semien had more plate appearances than any other player, so you'll see him far to the right of every graph. And his contact ability was pretty good compared to his peers, but that's not what made him stand out. So let's look at on-base percentage to add in the ability to draw walks. With good plate discipline, you can separate yourself from the rest of the pack in this category, like Juan Soto and Bryce Harper did last season. And in this category as well, Semien doesn't really stand out, besides how much he was able to play. But in terms of slugging percentage, which shows hitting for power and extra base hits, Semien was excellent. He hit 45 home runs, which was the most by any second baseman in MLB history. The only player with more total bases than Semien last year was his teammate, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. For a complete picture, we'll take a look at FanGraphs' version of wins above replacement, which is an all-encompassing stat that evaluates hitting, fielding, and base running to estimate the complete value of a player's performance. Clearly, Semien was deserving of MVP consideration, especially when you add in his great defensive and base running metrics. His season with the Blue Jays definitely goes down as one of the best one-year contracts we've ever seen. But that was last season, and Semien so far hasn't been that same level of player in 2022. In fact, he's been one of the worst hitters in the league. Now, we're jumping to this current season with the scatter plots. It's a completely different look for Semien so far. He's a bit of an outlier most of the time, and not in a good way. On the bright side, he's keeping his strikeouts down relative to the league, and his walk rate isn't far from where it's been during his best seasons. But what's missing is his ability to hit for power. After breaking a record last year with 45 home runs, he hit exactly 1 home run through the first 2 months of the season. This is shocking, and unfortunately, it's something we all feared could happen. Semien only had a couple great seasons in 2019 and in 2021, but before that, he was a league average hitter with much of his value coming from his defense. So we don't know what kind of player we're going to see moving forward. Semien is known for having slow starts every year, so it could just be an extreme version of that, plus he's had a few good games in recent weeks, so who knows. There's still plenty of time to turn it around, since this is just a fraction of what his 7-year contract will be, but the Rangers are counting on him to make a difference in the coming years. Corey Seager, on the other hand, has been doing well with the Rangers so far. He's a left-handed shortstop who is a key player with the Dodgers for their recent postseason runs. Seager signed the longest contract of the offseason, with the most guaranteed money of anybody. This deal is very reminiscent of the contracts that were given to Manny Machado and Francisco Lindor, which kind of set the tone for superstar free agents to get at least 10 years and $300 million. Seager's batting average appears especially low right now when you consider the fact that he's been a .300 hitter over the last 2 seasons. But he's still hitting the ball very hard, and that, combined with his low batting average on balls in play, suggests that he's been a little unlucky. He's making up for it with some added power, which is always a good thing to see early in the year. However, an important thing to keep in mind is that he's a shortstop. If you have an above-average hitter at a premium defensive position like shortstop, that's a pretty valuable player no matter what, and wins above replacement considers that in its calculation. As long as Seager can stay on the field, there's little doubt that he'll be getting All-Star votes. The question is when we'll see him back in the postseason, which is an environment that he flourished in during his time with the Dodgers. There's no player in the league more polarizing than Javier Baez. He's an explosive, dazzling athlete on both sides of the ball. There's no doubt about that. But he's inconsistent, and he's become notorious for swinging at everything and striking out all the time, which has made him a frustrating player to watch. The Detroit Tigers signed Baez to a 6-year deal to fill their need at shortstop, and shortly after debuting for his new team, he suffered a thumb injury and had to miss 9 games. Especially since returning from that injury, Baez's offense just hasn't been great. So far this season, he's been closer to league average with his strikeouts, but his swinging strike rate is higher than it's ever been, so it's reasonable to assume that his strikeout rate won't be getting better. But the worst part is, his power hasn't shown up yet, hitting only 1 home run in the entire month of May. Baez simply doesn't have many other offensive tools to help compensate if he has a lack of power. So overall, even though his defense at shortstop has graded out well, it still hasn't been enough to make up for his hitting. The Tigers' offense on the whole has been struggling so far, without a single player really standing out. By many measures, they've been the worst offense in all of MLB, by a fairly significant margin. But there's a good chance we'll see breakouts from guys like Baez, Austin Meadows, or Spencer Torkelson, which could make the AL Central race a bit more interesting. I think the Matt Olson trade was the most fascinating story of the offseason. I covered all the ins and outs of it in my first video for this channel, so make sure to check that out. But following the trade came an extension for 8 years and $168 million, which lands the new Braves first baseman a spot in this video. The extension bought out 2 of his arbitration years, so unlike all the other players that we're looking at today, this isn't exactly Olson's full market value. As for his hitting this year, it appears that he's settling into his new team pretty nicely. His walk rate in particular is top 10 in the major leagues, and it's as high as it's ever been in his career. This is always a good development to see as a player gets older. Now, Olson's slugging percentage is interesting, because his home run total isn't among the league leaders like you might expect. Olson is instead leading the league in doubles, which helps him out here. All in all, Olson is having a good year, but there are a lot of first basemen in MLB that are overshadowing him right now. Paul Goldschmidt, Ty France, and Freddie Freeman, to name a few. If Olson can rediscover his home run power, that should bring him back to the forefront. But let's look at the team that traded him, the Oakland Athletics. And it goes without saying that Olson is sorely missed in Oakland, along with all the other players that the A's traded away. As expected, they're already among the worst offenses in the league, and it looks like it's going to be a difficult season. But now we turn our attention to the first baseman who left some huge shoes to fill in Atlanta, and who's now wearing Dodger blue for the first time. And Freddie Freeman has been fantastic. He joined the most talented lineup in the league on a 6-year contract for $162 million. And really, there's not much to say here. Freeman is a model of consistency, and he's simply continuing to be the elite hitter that he's always been. With Corey Seager leaving, the Dodgers lost a top-of-the-order left-handed bat, and after moving a couple players to different positions in the infield, Freeman became the perfect fit. Along with Mookie Betts, who's playing like an MVP, Freeman is helping to keep the Dodgers on top of a competitive National League West, and there is little doubt that he'll be a difference maker in October. The Colorado Rockies are a puzzling team, and the contract that they gave to Kris Bryant is no exception. Bryant comes in with the 3rd highest average annual value of all the players that we're talking about today, and it was a questionable move to say the least. But let's not get it confused. Even though the Rockies haven't been particularly successful, they're not tanking to rebuild the roster like some teams do, nor are they tanking just to save their ownership money like others. The Rockies aren't tanking at all. Instead, they're living in an alternate universe, where they spend a good amount of money on some risky free agents and barely get anywhere. As Emma Baccelleri from Sports Illustrated describes it, they are performance art. And unfortunately so far, Kris Bryant hasn't done anything to help the team change course. Most obviously, he just hasn't been on the field very much yet. He missed time with a back injury, then played for a weekend, and then went back on the injured list because his back continued to bother him. So he hasn't racked up as many plate appearances as everyone else, and in the short amount of time that he played, it wasn't outstanding, especially with a ballpark like Coors Field that really favors hitters. There have been no home runs, he's not hitting the ball very hard. All in all, just not a lot to get excited about yet. There was plenty of skepticism when the signing was announced, but I don't think anyone expected it to start to sour so quickly. The biggest name on the free agent market was one of the last to sign, and it was a bit of a surprise. As I mentioned with Corey Seager, there's a bit of a blueprint now for superstars to get at least 10 years and $300 million, and shortstop Carlos Correa seemed to do everything to earn that in Houston. But he ended up signing with the Minnesota Twins on a shorter contract, with more money per year, plus the ability to opt out and hit the market again after either of the next 2 seasons. Already, Correa has missed 11 games with a bruised finger after being hit by a pitch, and has now landed on the COVID IL at the end of May. These have massive implications as to whether or not he'll opt out of his contract at the end of the year. According to Ken Rosenthal in a piece for The Athletic, Correa had to go for this short-term deal because there wasn't enough time to negotiate after the lockout was lifted. Plus, there was some skepticism around the health of his back. So it must be frustrating to be missing games due to a fluke injury and then illness. So far, it's been a decent year for Correa at the plate in the time that he's played. In that same piece for The Athletic, Correa says that April is always a tough month for him as he tries to figure things out, and the shortened spring training this season would certainly make that even tougher. His defensive metrics haven't been platinum glove worthy like they were last year, but it's too small of a sample to worry about. More than anything, Correa just has to stay on the field. He can't afford to miss more time if he wants to opt out in November and find a long-term deal. But even though Carlos Correa was the top free agent of the offseason, his former team, the Houston Astros, haven't been missing his performance at shortstop. And that is all thanks to 24-year-old rookie Jeremy Pena. Pena wasn't a very hyped prospect going into this season, but he's immediately become a Rookie of the Year favorite. And it's pretty incredible. Despite losing stars like George Springer and Carlos Correa to free agency, we've seen Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, and now Jeremy Pena rise up to take their place. Thanks to this player development pipeline, the Astros could very well continue their dominance over the AL West. The final top free agent to come off the board was Trevor Story, who had to move to second base with Xander Bogaerts already established at shortstop for the Boston Red Sox. Story is looking to prove himself after carrying the stigma of being a Rockies hitter, and the Red Sox put a lot of faith in him by giving him this contract. Coors Field in Denver is such a hitter-friendly ballpark that it's difficult to judge how well a player will perform when they move to another team. But on the whole, Story's been pretty good. His strikeout rate is very high, but he's hitting the ball hard enough to mostly make up for it. Plus, in this small sample, his defense appears to be a better fit at second base than it does at shortstop. The most interesting part about Story's season so far hasn't been his total numbers, but rather how he's progressed over time. Because Story wasn't hitting very well in April. There was a lot of concern about his offensive potential in the first few weeks, if he was maybe just a byproduct of Coors Field, until all of a sudden, he erupted in a series against the Mariners a couple weeks ago at Fenway Park, hitting 5 home runs in 4 games. And he stayed hot since then, and he had a fantastic month of May. Players can take time to adjust to new teams, especially coming from Colorado, but Story is proving that you can be a good hitter no matter what city you play in. The day before opening day, third baseman Jose Ramirez signed a somewhat controversial extension with the Cleveland Guardians, 2 years before he could have hit free agency. Despite being a hot commodity on the trade market, with the chance of being sent to a contending team, he chose to remain with the only organization he's ever known. And the Guardians got a massive discount. Ramirez signed for the lowest average annual value of this entire group that I've talked about today, but without question, he's the best player of them all. He leads this group of players in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, home runs, and RBI. His strikeout rate in particular is ridiculous, and it's the best in the majors among qualified hitters. Ramirez is as complete a ball player as you'll see in the game today. Put it all together, and he's a textbook MVP candidate. And this level of performance is nothing new. Stretching back to 2016, he's been the third most valuable player in baseball according to F4, behind Mookie Betts and Mike Trout. And between the two of those guys are the 2 largest contracts in MLB history. Now, before I compare the contracts, this isn't quite apples to apples. Ramirez was going to get a smaller contract because he was already 29 years old when extending his deal, while Betts and Trout were each 27 when they signed their extensions. But this graph only shows how much these 3 are making from age 29 onwards. And this disparity to Ramirez is enormous. A player like Ramirez could be making tens of millions more than what he signed for, or at least he could guarantee himself a job through his late 30s. So the question is, why? Why did Ramirez accept such a low offer? The story was told in a piece for ESPN by Alden Gonzalez. In the words of Ramirez's agent, the Guardians told Ramirez that they can't afford what he's worth, and he told them that he didn't care. Ramirez knows that he left money on the table, but he says, 150 million or 200 million, my life is going to be the same. I'm happier with 150 million in Cleveland than 200 million somewhere else. I want to thank FanGraphs for their data, Tableau for data visualization, and thanks to you for putting up with my gravelly sick voice. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one.